Welcome to the Bicycle Kick podcast, where we discuss money, power and politics in sport. I'm Lachlan and I'm a lawyer.
I'm Max, I'm a business person and former sports agent.
And I'm Jordan, just a sports fan with opinions.
Come here every week, like, subscribe and share our content. Today we're going to be talking about the World Cup. As everyone knows, this has been quite a controversial issue recently, considering America, Canada and Mexico are going to be hosting. Now, the first thing I want to discuss today with you, Jordan, specifically is the pretext of this World Cup. So what were the political issues with previous World Cups in Qatar, in Russia, and how have we got here?
Yeah, so Russia, if we start in Russia, so that's 2018. The main, problems we was talking about was the initial war. So in the lead up to it, they had annexed in Crimea. There was also the human rights concerns. There was the LGBT concerns. There was just a whole, moral issue standpoint of having it in Russia. So everyone was worried that this was a case of, sports washing, as they want to call it. So that was a big problem in the lead up to it. And I think with countries that are hosting the World Cup, they obviously have to look at, rebranding their image in a way to fit FIFA and what was going on. And I think it was kind of similar in Qatar in 2022 as well. But their concerns were more centered around LGBT concerns as well as migrant labor. So there was big stories coming out about slave labor being used to build all the stadiums because it takes a certain level of infrastructure to be able to host a World Cup, and Qatar were nowhere near ready. So they had to build so many stadiums in such a short period of time. And I think that was one of the biggest concerns and the biggest issues leading into the World Cup. And now we come to the US, which already had the infrastructure in place through their numerous sporting stadiums that they already got. So through the MLS and the NFL. But then there's the big issue of the political climate, the numerous wars throughout the last year that the US have been involved in, the problems going on with, say, ICE internally and what's happening there. So there was a lot of concerns around entry into the US, safety in the US, whether the US should even be involved and whether it's just them flexing their power that they have across the world.
Do you know what I find really interesting is this idea of selective enforcement. So Russia were expelled after their invasion of Ukraine. You know, obviously we have issues of whether Israel had been allowed to participate recently. But Sepp Blatter said, didn't he, that, giving Qatar the World Cup was a mistake. And so we get onto this point now where America won it via a bid, right, of the membership countries. It's the first time that this has happened. Yeah. It's the first time that 3 different countries are hosting the World Cup. But Max, do you think that politically how a country is perceived should actually affect whether they can host a World Cup or not?
Well, in some instances, yes, because obviously how a country is politically perceived will influence how well and safely they can run a World Cup or a tournament. You know what? I don't even know why it's a question around the US, like in any sense, by the way, being questioned around their ability to host a World Cup or whether they should, or the selection process. You're talking about probably the most well-equipped country in the world to host any sporting event. And if we're actually interested in sporting event, then the US should most credibly be one that can host. And yes, I understand that there are concerns around certain countries, whether they can or shouldn't be able to host, or whether they could be removed or whatever. But I just want to be clear. I think America is also contributing to sports development business-wise and legal and sporting events globally. And I don't see why it's a question for the US.
Well, let's get into that. So as we know, we previously had the FIFA Club World Cup that was held in America, right? And Trump is there on the stage with Chelsea lifting the trophy. And I think a lot of people, but I think a lot of people around the world, Christian Pulisic is hailed as the LeBron James of soccer, call it soccer, you're over here. But isn't the whole point that we're seeing this kind of US commercialization of football as it's happening? And I think we can see that at the moment with the ad breaks that's going on within America. Jordan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think as a football purist, the idea of it being soccer is crazy as well. The fact
I agree with that.
The fact that a country that calls it soccer can host a football World Cup is insane to me.
Disagree with that.
But then also, I think we're now looking at, it's almost with if we're going to speak about the ad breaks to start with, it's almost looking at a game of quarters. Football is a game of two halves. That is also what we've always been said, especially, as a kid playing football, you can be 1-0 down at half time. It's a game of two halves, but now it's a game of 4 quarters. And you look at certain games like Germany-Curacao, right? Curacao scored. They leveled the game up.
They were on top as well.
They were on top. They were dominating. At hydration break, they're going to lose 7-1. And I'm not saying that they wouldn't have lost 7-1 to Germany because Germany are a great nation, but that hydration break changes the game. And even you look at the England-Croatia game, England were on top leading up into the hydration break. Then suddenly the game just dips again, and the flow of the game changes, and obviously they were able to come out. But
this touches on an important point, is that we're talking about football just to watch, but off the pitch, these hydration breaks are for advertising.
Yeah, it's awful.
So there was a game in which the fourth official is halting the referee on the pitch because Fox are delayed showing their advert.
Yeah.
Now, someone on Instagram, funnily enough, has done the maths on this, and he's worked out there would be 832 ad breaks during the World Cup. Now, if you do an average slot of, say, $250,000 for a company to advertise their services, it's only going to get more expensive once the tournament goes on. In the semi-final and final, it could be up to £750,000. That's £208 million going back into FIFA. So, Max, I know that you're very much for these hydration breaks. You don't see it as an issue, but can you understand that from a financial level, and we'll go a lot more onto that, in terms of exploiting the fans financially, do you not think that that's somewhat distasteful?
I don't see it as an exploitation of the fans at all. First of all, yeah, I am a business person, so I look at it from that angle. It's do I, as a football fan, want to be in a stadium and have hydration breaks in an air-conditioned stadium? No.
Yeah.
But I have more gripes with the fact that we're now talking about hydration breaks, and we've suddenly forgotten that VAR can somehow delay games by 7 or 8 minutes or 10 minutes, which, yes, it might get added on at the end. Talking about breaking up the flow. Do you know what's worse? Breaking up celebrations. People so I know this is old school chat and everyone's been taught this to death. But I don't see why everyone's getting angry about hydration breaks when we haven't sorted out the other core issues we've got. If you're a genuine purist and we really care about that, get rid of VAR. That's genuine purism, right? So that's where I think everyone's argument should start.
Yeah.
Hydration breaks is, for me, if it generates more business revenue for soccer, football, I think it's going to increase the amount of money that goes into the sport. So we will become more competitive as a global sport. That sort of thing, if it even trickle back to the Premier League or globally, will be massive. It might probably make the Americans more interested in how they can commercialize financially football, and it could have a global impact, which drives so much revenues. It could eventually reach the top leagues. We want football to grow. That's my favourite sport. So I think it just enhances the ability for countries and clubs to make further revenues. Do I like it? Not necessarily, but from a business perspective, it could be very good for football clubs around the world, particularly if they could find a way of working with FIFA, UEFA, their national associations.
Well, let's talk about this now. So I think that the finances has been the main talking point of this World Cup, whether it's the ticket pricing, whether it's the commercialization of the sport. And also what's really important is the price going on to these host cities. Yeah. So let's talk about sponsorship while we're here, Max. So you would have seen that effectively all stadiums in America, so there are 11 host cities. And if you look at the MetLife Stadium, for example, has now had to be renamed while the tournament's going on. I saw a really good Levi's advert the other day, which basically where they had to take down the Levi Stadium. They couldn't show that it was Levi's. Yeah. So they had to put, a big white sheet in front of it, but it ended up being quite a good advertising story. In sponsorship, these stadiums have partnerships already, right? With Heinz, with competition of Coca-Cola, who's the official brand sponsor of the World Cup. You go into these stadiums and into hospitality, Heinz is covered. All the sponsorship is covered. It's cost about $500,000 for all of these host cities to remove their branding. So with regards to putting money back into football or soccer, do you think that that's actually good for these host cities where they have to burden so much financial pressure just to host the World Cup?
Yeah, easily. So how much money do you think is being spent in their restaurants and their hotels and all around it? I know that what they're going to talk about is policing and environmental impact, cleaning up. There's a huge cost and burden to that. But for economy, local economy, it's always proven that hosting these World Cups is fantastic. And I think it's a great thing for the communities to be able to have and host these kind of major events. It's great multiculturally and I think it's very important Americans do have all these different nationalities turning up on their doorstep, reminding them that they have a role to play in the world and that everyone is mainly there for a good time. So yeah, that those cost burdens, it's really down to states and their relationships with the stadium ownership to recompense any of that cost. But otherwise, outside of that, the state laws, etc., and state relationships should allow them to secure some of that revenue back. But I think it's an amazing thing, and there's always going to be a downside. If you want to point out a downside of any of these hosting, you can. But I think commercially, overall, they should be more rewarding than not.
Jordan, what do you think about that?
I think certain cities have had it worse than others. You look at, for example, I was reading something the other day about Kansas City. They don't actually have a big a public prison, if you want to call it as such. If they have detainees, they have to go across the border to a neighboring city. So they had spent $25 million in the lead up to this using their tax funds that they collate throughout a whole year. So technically they've used a whole year of funds that they've brought in to build this prison to be able to host, just in case they need it or should they need it. But the prison's not built yet. And it wasn't built in time for the World Cup. So they sunk all this money into it, ridiculous, on top of additional funding to build a prison that once the World Cup's done, they probably don't need. So there's this massive funding going in that they felt they needed to do, which never got done. And now they've just wasted a lot of money.
Or did they just build a prison that they wanted anyway and use the World Cup as
reason
that's for it?
But then where are they getting their funding from? So it's not as if they're using state funding. A lot of this, they're sharing the burden of these costs. So America were meant to be hosting the 2031 Women's World Cup, and that bid has not currently been confirmed yet because 11 of these host cities wrote to the soccer chief in the US basically saying, based on how this World Cup is currently going, we do not have the capability, the infrastructure and the money to pour more money into the next World Cup.
Or the want. They don't have the desire
or the desire. There was a kind of a committee meeting, wasn't there, where one of the LA, Catherine Schlossman, CEO of the LA Sports and Entertainment Commission, said, well, what do we get out of this? And FIFA said, well, we're going to put your town on the map. And she said, what, Hollywood? LA? On what map are you looking at? Because it's not the map I'm looking at. And whilst I appreciate that we're only seeing this globalization of football in recent years in America, you look at Beckham, you look at Messi, everything that's going on there, and they'd be a fool not to capitalize on it. But Max, let me hit you with some of the statistics, because this is really interesting.
Oh dear.
So you're a businessman, you need to be ready for these.
Money talks.
Yeah. 57.8 million in lost tax revenue by Missouri, Georgia and Florida, who waived taxes on ticket sales to entice FIFA. $15 million Dallas Broadcast Center was built for the tournament. It's going to be knocked down. And the New Jersey congressman has said that $37 million has already been spent on upgrades to the MetLife Stadium and $13 million on the turf alone. All of this money, right, is being burdened onto these host cities. So when you talk about the money that's going to be spent in restaurants and bars, etc., do you not think that the real issue is that FIFA are also charging all these fans to go to the games and transport and all of that? What are your thoughts on that?
I just don't think it's as simple as that. I think that if you've got, it depends on the ownership of every asset and entity around each state. But let's say if the airports are suddenly getting much more utilization than they otherwise would, then they would be charging airlines taxes and placement fees within airports. There'd be that's an example. Now, who owns those airports? If the airports are state owned, then there's revenues. If they're not, they're privately owned, then that's generating revenues for those locals. That's a start. Taxi firms who is owning that. Could there be? I mean, this is privately owned, but there's going to be other state-run benefits of it if people are using. I know we've hearing about trains and buses, etc., which is putting a stress on them, but they are also generating revenue through that as well from the utilization of those areas. Revenue is like revenues in restaurants. So is sales tax. If you're in America, you'll have that special thing in many places called a resorts fee. You have other fee. Have you ever looked at a tax bill when you're in the US hotels? And
I try not to.
You're
look
like,
at it,
what? It's like, yeah. So you've got like 7 or 8 different new taxes on there. So it's to say that, and I know that some of it's federal and some of it will be state, but let's assume that there's a lot more tax that they're gaining through that. And also when you hear things like waiving tax on tickets, it's weird when people say waiving. So there is that money wasn't actually there. You haven't actually lost it. You've made a decision from whatever influence to let that go. So stats like that are not necessarily realistic to how much loss there is. And if they're, for me, there will be some elements where they're hitting some losses, but there are so many different ways that they're making benefits. And that even these, I don't know, even the football teams, stadiums, I'm sure they're even selling their local shirts, right?
Yeah,
I don't know, but assume. Let's hear how much of merchandise of the local football teams, even Kansas City, the Chiefs, how many England fans or any fans are coming home with Chiefs shirts? I don't want to know. Who knows? There's so much additional business revenue that just gets completely lost.
I think
and not calculated.
I think, I guess that's an important part of it, but it just depends on what you see the World Cup as being for. Like, I know we're talking about the host cities and things like that. I think the whole idea of the World Cup to me is this inclusive tournament that happens, all these nations that come together, and all the fans can come together and watch their nations play and etc. So yes, it might benefit the host cities, but at what cost to the consumers really is my argument. Because if we're going to go back to
what consumers, like what
the consumers, the fans, it depends. And even me using the word consumers is the fact that it's so Americanized. We're not consumers, we're fans, we're supporters. Awfully.
Well, Max, I mean, you said the first thing you said, well, do I ever look at the tax on kind of bills? No, because you're normally picking up the tab, so it's not normally does it? But going back on that, but you said you were talking about transport, right? So Jordan, what did they do in Qatar for transport for the fans? What were they doing?
So I'll even give you Russia. So in Russia, they had free transport for ticket holders on designated routes. So it wasn't completely free, but certain routes to the stadium and back were free for ticket holders. In Qatar, they had, I think it's called the Hire Card. I might have butchered that pronunciation, but they had free transport on metros, trains, etc. for all ticket holders. So you're able to move around and access stadiums a lot easily. In the US, on the other hand, in typical, I guess, commercialized and fashion, we're looking at an increase in fees. So, for example, just to get this right, we look at the matches at the MetLife. So, standardly, transport to the MetLife and away is about $12.90 on a normal and equivalent fee. The initial prices that they placed on this was $150. You look at that and it's just like, what why are we doing this? It's like, I understand you need to make your money back and etc., but you're now charging a fan $150 for a train fare, which is the only way they can get to the stadium. And this received so much criticism, so they ended up dropping their fees, the fee down to $98. But $98 still from $12.90, which it will be in 4 months' time again, is insane. So you look at the cost of this for consumers, for fans, because they are fans, and you're now not just factoring just the ticket prices to go to a game. You're factoring the travel internally, the travel externally into the country, etc. You're going to price out so many fans and so many of the smaller nations that can't afford to travel, which is quite sad considering that, you know, some of the biggest moments in the World Cup, you look at some of the fans, like the first game of the World Cup last year, Saudi Arabia and Argentina, that stadium was amazing. The atmosphere in the stadium was amazing, and because you had a lot of the Argentinian fan base that travelled, because they have a massive fan base that travelled, but a lot of the Saudi Arabian fan base that were there because it was a short distance across to Qatar. But you'll lose that same atmosphere from the diehard travelling fans that can't afford to be able to do it.
I think the counter argument there is that there will always be demand for a World Cup. You know, fundamentally, all these issues persist before the tournament. If there's an incredible England game and we go on and, dare I say, win it, we're not going to perceive this tournament negatively at all. Well, you know, so I think the topic, unfortunately, that we're dancing around and that we're going to have to discuss is ticket pricing. So the European Commission have actually been investigating FIFA for a number of reasons to do with the cost of tickets. Now, I have a ticket to a round of 32 game. It was a massive hassle to get those tickets. You've got balloting, you have dynamic pricing that goes up and down. Before the first group stage game, there are 185,000 tickets still not sold. We've seen it online. We can see the empty seats. Yeah. Yet Infantino was saying this is the highest demand we've ever seen for a World Cup, right? So if we get into the actual statistics of it and the tickets itself, if you're being misleading in the way that you are presenting these tickets, how many are being sold, the price of them. Did you know this, Max, that there was a crypto token that FIFA released, right? That was a right to buy. And so loads of fans for $100 could buy this token in the chance to be ahead of everyone else in the queue, right? Eventually, when they saw the price of the tickets, they felt scammed.
Yeah.
They felt scammed. And so many just went ahead and didn't buy any tickets. FIFA made millions off of that. And that's something that people don't know. So the point, Max, that I would give to you is that, do you think it's fair, especially because FIFA are not for profit and all this money ultimately goes back into the member states of football and to increase football infrastructure around the world? Do you still stand by that even with hiking up these prices, it's justifiable?
There's quite a lot there. First of all, on the train stuff, I think that is wrong. I do think that's right. I don't think you should have some sort of surge pricing on train fares and all the rest. This is not taxi. It should
it's like being on Uber.
It's incorrect. On FIFA and the tickets. First of all, anyone who bought those crypto tokens, no offense to anyone, but that was your decision.
So you didn't do it?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
To be fair,
I'm out $100 now.
Even if it's like, if you don't know what the price of the ticket is, you don't know anything about it.
But I think if you're basing it off of previous years where they would be in a kind of all rough kind of category, where, like, you know, even you look at Premier League games, you know, category A games are this, category B games are roughly this. You have an idea, but then to get the chance to do it, and suddenly you're seeing hundreds of dollars.
Can I interject there? I bought what was a category 2 ticket, which was meant to be pretty decent in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Now we finally had those seats released. I think maybe 2 or 3 months after I bought those tickets, they're in the nosebleeds, and everyone's saying that actually all the categories are kind of changed so that they can have potentially more hospitality seats as well, right? So I think when it comes to seats and tickets, at the end of the day, a value of a ticket is only as high as someone wants to pay for them. So I do understand the argument where it's, well, of course, there's money to be made. These are far and few between that you get to go and see a World Cup. We can charge what we want for it.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I assume if FIFA don't, they would have a category 4 or whatever, which is to be kept at some sort of level for fans. But yeah, I mean, the problem is demand. I mean, we've got a big question here of whether we're talking about sport as for the fans as just everyday sport, or are we talking about business? Unfortunately, I think sport just for sport doesn't exist anymore. If you did, go to your local amateur football league and love that. But if you care enough to be watching the World Cup, you are watching business. So you've got to deal with it. And by the way, we haven't even introduced our backgrounds, but I used to be a football agent.
Yep.
And I can tell you that football players, even in your favourite football clubs, are looking after themselves. We all kind of know that, but we still have a fantasy of what football is. But we all know deep down what the reality is. It's the same with this, with FIFA and everything else. And they've got demand. And he probably has, by the way, he's probably not lying, Infantino, by saying it is the best demand he's ever seen. Doesn't mean that it's the best ticket selling that he's ever done. He might want to keep the prices high for a reason. Is the breakdown that slightly emptier stadiums actually does result in greater revenues because the prices are so high? is a delta that I haven't studied, but it could well be that it is. But then there should be an argument that we want full stadiums, because that's what it's all about. But no one can force them to do that. That's a different conversation.
I think the argument around a lot of people is you start to conflate the two. You look at the magic that is football, and then, as you've just been talking about, Max, the business of the game. Like, a lot of us think with our hearts when it comes to football, especially we're England fans. Unfortunately, we haven't been that successful in recent years, yet we still believe that we can go on and win it. Well, I'd say that's successful. We have not been successful. Unfortunately, Jordan, you're a pessimist, unfortunately.
I'm just realistic. We haven't won anything.
I'm also realistic. Come on, England, but I'm also realistic.
It might be coming home.
Yeah, that's what...
It might be.
But this is the whole point, right? Is that, fine, if you're trying to conflate the two, I understand where you're coming from in that, no, the business of sport, if anything, what keeps World Cups going is because this revenue that FIFA pour back into themselves, into confederations. So, Jordan, a point that we haven't actually spoken about today is the fact that we have 48 teams in this World Cup.
Yeah.
48 teams. So what is that? I think 67.5% of teams in the group stages can now go through to the knockout rounds. So, of course, it's more football, which is fantastic, but...
Is it?
But it's at what risk?
Exactly, exactly.
I mean, you know, your football purists will watch every single game that they can watch in a World Cup.
I was up till 3 a.m. the other night.
I mean, some games are at 5 a.m. It's insane. But the problem for us is that the primetime games are at 3, 5 a.m. whenever they are, which is a nightmare if you got to get up for work in the morning.
And FIFA are very shrewd because they leave the big games, so England, your Spain, to times that work for us on a European calendar, because they know that that's where the majority of viewership comes from.
And it's thinking, well, you know, what are they doing this for? I mean, going back to, I guess, in the sense of the tickets and stuff like that, we'll probably touch on it a bit later, but you look at UEFA. UEFA have fixed their ticket prices for the Euros, and they know that the idea of football and football tournaments are the fans. Obviously, it's about the teams winning, but the fans make the tournament.
So you bring up a really good point, and I think we should probably talk about it now. It's this idea of UEFA versus FIFA. So they're two confederations, institutions that run world sport as we know it, really. So, as you say, UEFA have capped their prices for the next Euros to be, I think it's 30 euros or something for your average kind of ticket price. You have Cheferin, who's the president of UEFA, walked out of the FIFA Council when Infantino was speaking. He did not attend any of the FIFA Club World Cup as well. And am I right in saying he's a vice president of FIFA, correct? Because he's one of the confederations. So there's a clear battle here to be, you know, the leader of sport in reality. Do you think that the perception against FIFA and against Infantino, if anything, is made worse by the fact that UEFA are trying to do those things?
Hasn't there always been a sort of long-standing dispute or relationship issue between UEFA and FIFA? And then there's one between football associations and UEFA. Mm-hmm. I think that will... whoever won that battle, there'll be another battle soon to come. So that's the way I see it. There will always be conflicts.
Yeah, I think the choice of the US being the host of the World Cup is quite a polarizing choice, and I think it helped UEFA in certain stances now, because we've had a lot of the conversations in the lead up to the World Cup. We're now 10 days into it, a week into it. A lot of the conversations were about ticket prices, which we've spoken about, which a lot of the negative criticism about the World Cup being hosted in America was there. So the capping of the UEFA capping the Euros has been like, oh, you've done that, we're going to just cut all criticism and we're going to cap it. And then you got other things like, for example, the Somalian referee, Omar Artan, not being denied from entering the US, even though he was the best African referee in 2025. He had refereed in Champions League. These big situations he's refereed in, he was denied into the US. And so straight away, UEFA said he's going to referee our UEFA Super Cup final. And it's straight away, it's UEFA seem to be looking at picking up on the frails and the flaws of what's happening out of this World Cup. They're kind of just sat there like, oh, you've done that wrong, we're going to do this. You've done that wrong, we're going to do this. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Euros, because whether this whether in the World Cup, FIFA then will do the same thing again the next time round, and we're going to consistently be in this little battle of where we go, and especially if Infantino's still here when it comes to the next World Cup, and it is still him running it. It'll be interesting what happens, I think, because
So I mean, we've spoken about money, right? We need to get into politics and power here because. You know, it's getting so difficult to keep track of all the issues, you know. So I've recently seen, let's just discuss some of the issues that the USA is currently facing and why people are chastising them, right? So you just covered Omar Artan, who tried to enter. Iran inevitably is a polemic and controversial situation right now in which that they are not allowed to train within the US. I believe some of the coaches were denied entry to the US as well. And I think the US claimed that they had ties to terrorist organizations.
Same with the referee from Somalia as well. They said that he had links to terrorist organizations.
And I believe,
whatever that means.
I believe Iran had a game in the US and did they have to fly back out to their Mexican base straight away?
As soon as they finished the game, they kind of had to wrap up and fly back that same night.
And so this leads us into Infantino and the relationship that he has with Donald Trump.
But just before we get into that, why is there any sort of doubt that the US would be wrong to stop the Somalian referee or some of the Iranian coaches if they decide it could actually be a security breach?
Well,
that is absolutely their decision and their intelligence to do that. I don't think any of us can actually truly question whether, because we don't know enough.
We obviously don't know, but I think the reason the Somalian referee one hit so I guess so prevalent in the news was the lead up, minus the referee himself, but the lead up to this of Donald Trump's comments about Somalia, his consistent bashing of the Somalian congresswoman, his downplaying of that whole region is a big problem. Also, the referee obtained a visa. He got a visa from the US Embassy. He was granted to leave the country to fly to America. It was only when he got to America they denied his visa and said he has to go home. So it's what's happened in a period of time from where he's able to leave and fly that he's now not allowed to referee. And I think that's the question we have to ask there. And with the Iranian national team, okay, yes, there is the argument of if you're at war with a country, would you, for safety reasons, allow a whole contingency from a country to come into your country? But if they've all obtained a background checks and visas, etc., why would they not be allowed? And it then looks at the case of competitive advantage. If they have to fly into a country, get 3-4 hours before they play a game and then fly straight back out again. What conditioning?
But there is two things. You are talking about countries' security, and then you're talking about the FIFA World Cup and competitive advantage or disadvantage.
I don't think anyone is disputing America's right to not let these individuals. I agree with what you're saying. And it could be
political, by the way. Yeah, it may well be that Trump's decided, I don't want that Somalian. It's an example. But also, anyone who's been to the US, you can travel to the US and still get there, and they're going to question
the security is the most scariest thing I've ever been to in my life.
Exactly. So it's very possible.
I am coming next week. Please let me in.
Look, and you might get taken into one of those rooms. I've been there. I see what happens. So, and that happens to someone you think is very simple British national. So if there was any kind of links, or any kind of, they could deny at that point. So, and it could be political reasons as well. But I say, Iran being in a different base from others, are they at competitive disadvantage? Yes, they probably are. But at the same time, if I was FIFA, I'm thinking that's the best way that I can get them still involved.
Yeah,
so that's the balance.
I guess so. Right. I think this goes back into this argument, right? Is FIFA and football there to unite the world? What Infantino says all the time is that he's there for peace. He says that Donald Trump is there for peace.
I think that's a bit over the top, isn't it?
No, I understand that.
Save the world.
But we're talking about the best African referee in 2025. Right. So then where do you stop? Where do we draw the line? Where do you draw the line? And I think that there are arguments on both sides. And I think this is why it leads more into Infantino and his apparent political neutrality, right? And I think this is a really important issue that we need to get onto.
Yeah.
So, Jordan, can you just run through for me why there are people and who they are that are saying that Infantino has arguably breached FIFA's regulations? I think it's Article 4, subsection 2, which is that FIFA need to remain politically neutral.
Yeah, so firstly, let's talk about the big one is the FIFA Peace Prize, and a newly created thing. And the inaugural winner, Donald Trump. While he's in the midst of, multiple wars, he had, gone into he had sent the army or whoever into another country and taken out a leader in South America. He'd done all of this and was still granted an inaugural Peace Prize. Whether that is because it is preserving business relations with a host country that's coming up.
Because that is important.
Well, it's obviously important, but you don't create an award for a Peace Prize and give it to him when, one would argue it's not very...
Yeah, but in that case, who cares about a FIFA Peace Prize?
But it's the optics of it. It's not necessarily who cares about the award. It's the optics of it. Is why FIFA granting this to the president. But then also there's other things. He has a place on the Gaza Peace Board, which is a highly
sought after role, right?
But it's also quite, controversial position. It's a controversial board completely because we're not going to get into the politics of that, but it's a whole controversial thing in itself.
Isn't Tony Blair on that one? Is that the same?
Yes. Again,
okay. Without getting too deep.
We're not going on to that part either, but we'll keep it sport really. Unless Tony Blair played football, I don't know, did he? But also with that, then the little known thing as well is that Infantino under FIFA took out a lease for an office in Trump Tower in New York, but according to people, the office has remained empty and not used. So they're paying rent directly to the Trump family for an office they don't even use. And knowing that that's in Trump Tower and in New York, that rent's not going to be cheap. I don't know what the figures are, but when you're looking at stuff like that, also, add to that as well, he went to Trump's inauguration. Why is the head of FIFA at a president's inauguration? I don't know if they have ever been to any other previous president's inauguration. I'm not too sure.
I believe it was the first time.
It was the first time?
Yeah, I believe it was the first time.
Even optically, whether Infantino does agree politically with Donald Trump or not, optically, it doesn't look good. It looks like they're really siding FIFA in one specific place and alongside Donald Trump, who I guess is quite controversial across the world.
So I see the controversies, I see the optics, and I see what people say. I think that, of course, there's another side, right? Is that you need to consider, as Max said earlier, right? Is that America are the biggest infrastructure in this World Cup. It's where the majority of the money's coming from. So is it not incredibly important that he is posturing mostly with the US president, because the majority of these games are happening in his jurisdiction? And maybe, arguably, he had an eye for that, and that's why he's doing it in the first place. Or do you think there's anything else to it, Max?
Well, you said off air, like, why is he not buddying up in Canada or Mexico?
Yeah.
It's very obvious. If that was the three nations to choose of a World Cup, if Mexico decided they don't want to be involved, or Canada, then the US can cover everything. Their sports infrastructure is phenomenal. Whereas, and I've lived in Vancouver, Canada, if even the Canadians had to start hosting it by themselves because the US didn't like where it's going, they will not be able to do and handle the World Cup across the whole country. You'd end it up in a couple of cities or a few cities, if Quebec, etc. So I think that when you say about Infantino, I think that's superb relationship management. I'm actually very impressed by the way that Infantino is handling Trump. If everyone can sort of read what Trump's about. A bit of ego stroking, a bit of relationship development is what he needs to be on board. And FIFA, to make a really good tournament, needs to make sure that they've got the political background to do it. Otherwise, there could have been more major problems for FIFA, and FIFA doesn't want that either. And also, you want a smooth sporting event. So I think the way he's handled it, and renting of particular office space, just because they didn't utilise it. I mean, go and prove that was something else. I mean, it may well be that that's just a nice way of doing something behind the scenes, but it may well be that they did think they were going to need an office. Whatever it might be, that it's secondary backup. Everyone's got backup plans. In any case, just good business relationships or operational relationships. And Infantino would do it with the next World Cup.
I think the issue isn't necessarily that it was underhanded. Again, as Jordan was saying, the optics of it, right? So if there's an economic tie between a president of FIFA and a president of the US where, you know, these tournaments are going on, again, is there an element of the relationship being too close, and what happens if that relationship weren't to work out?
It's not real world, though. I think this is where we had the issues with Sepp Blatter before, and the elements of corruption, and there was discovery of what would be traditional corruption. I'm starting to wonder whether it's FIFA, UEFA, or anyone who thinks they could take over major event. Can major events actually happen without? And I'm not endorsing anything, by the way, making that clear. It's very wrong, but there has to be a sort of borderline deep relationships between countries and major sport events that will absolutely rip through cities, infrastructure, policing, and so on.
There needs to be good relationships.
There has to be a good relationship. Yeah. And it has to be worth their while. They have to believe it's going to improve their reputation with their own country and globally. And I think there has to be a little bit of a smoothing of relationships. So I totally get some of you will say it's really, that goes against the neutrality of what FIFA is, and I do see the argument for that. Right. But I also understand the relationship of trying to make it run smooth.
Yeah, I agree completely. I just think I agree with that bit about trying to make it run smoothly, but my argument with is now about bargaining power, right? The idea of the World Cup is countries bid to host the World Cup, and America bid and won it. But now it seems like, you know, you mentioned Donald Trump and a bit of ego stroking, etc., and all of this going on. FIFA are almost pandering to United States to be like, please host this. We're going to do extra X, Y, and Z for you to host this. Where you look back at Russia, they required certain commitments from Russia to say, you know, you are going to be doing this for visa and entry and make entry safe. Okay.
And also,
and they did the same in Qatar.
And also Russia have been excluded from future tournaments, right, for their invasion of Ukraine. And of course, we are not going to be discussing politically what that means, but if anything, they can effectively remove one country for an invasion, and yet the optics are, and people are saying, well, America have been doing that this year.
Well, yeah, exactly.
That's what people are saying. You know, whether we agree with it or disagree with it is another thing. But I think that the issue that Infantino keeps facing, and this is why the Norwegian FA have recently said that he thinks that he is breaching this kind of neutrality thing, is because it's selective enforcement, selective decision making. That's okay, some things are fine for one individual and not for another.
Yeah, but look, like neutrality, I don't think, again, exists really in the real world. That is something that maybe AI, some object, but even AI is going to be fed through of subjective material to make its own decision. Humans are not objective and not neutral. So let's think of countries that have always said they're neutral, like Sweden and
Switzerland.
All those, so even like Finland, who tried to stay out of everything. As soon as war potentially comes on their doorstep, look at Sweden and Finland's desire to enter NATO, to go a little bit more political. But the reality is, when you're pushed into a certain situation, neutrality dissipates. So, and I think it's great to talk about neutrality, and I think no one better than someone like Norway that also has just oil, money and great funds, and just invest incredibly well, to say this from a position of luxury of independence. But the reality is, when they have to work within the confines of a global, bringing countries together that are divisive, that are going to get some of them actually genuinely in wars against each other, what are FIFA supposed to do apart from try and feel? But I do also agree that it is very difficult to think, how can they make one decision one way? There should be more of some sort of rule objectivity around how they make those decisions. There should be something around, you know, if you've taken the XYZ actions. At the moment, it does seem like, FIFA's based in Switzerland, the invasion of Russia through Ukraine and potentially threat to Europe concerns FIFA as maybe even as an organisation to be in Europe and it's a European fight rather than a Middle Eastern fight. But I'm not disagreeing that it should be more objective in the way that they make those decisions.
And hey, Infantino is battling a lot here. He's dealing with a huge World Cup.
Yeah.
He's dealing with posturing politicians all over the world.
Yeah.
He's also dealing with a private claim against him from Michel Platini at the moment. And so it's very
Platini,
interesting.
huh? Okay.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to talk about this because how did Infantino get the job in the first place? So as we know, Sepp Blatter was, funnily enough, neither of them have been officially charged. I believe they've both been actually absolved.
Yeah, they have.
Now, so unfortunately we can't use any words in terms of corruption or anything because they can't be labelled as this because they haven't been formally charged. But those were the charges against them. And I believe around the time when Infantino was actually bidding to be FIFA president, there was a delayed payment from Platini to Sepp Blatter, which they said was just kind of late consultancy charges or fees. I think Infantino and others used language of that's a bribe to try and get Platini the role. And unfortunately, Platini was then against his own criminal charges, and Infantino kind of had a very smooth route now to becoming the FIFA president. Now, recently, Platini has come out and said, actually, I'm going to accuse Infantino of malicious prosecution. I'm going to accuse him of peddling his influence to try and become FIFA president. And if we're talking about optics, a lot of what we've been talking about today is optics.
Oh, yeah.
It's really interesting that a very controversial time for him where all eyes are on this World Cup, that these charges are now being brought. Yeah. Do you think that this would help Infantino in terms of making this World Cup the best it's ever been?
It's just awful. It's awful. I think you're battling what people are already speaking about the World Cup itself, and this is his first World Cup by running FIFA. And he wanted to be the biggest World Cup, to make the most money, etc., which it still possibly can make the most money and do that stuff. But when you're consistently being now drawn back into the corruption days of FIFA, to put it as that, the idea or the optically to look at it like that, it's always going to draw a problem for Infantino. And going back to what we was talking about in terms of his political alliances and how he's postured himself as part of being a supporter of being a supporter in the US, I guess, of them hosting and etc. It's not a great look for FIFA that they can't just have something that runs smoothly and the World Cup just being overshadowed by all these problems. The fact that, in the lead up to other World Cups, we had all these issues, but once the games actually started, all we're talking about is the football. Everyone's just so excited to talk about the football. But now every day it seems that something new is coming up, something new is happening, and it's how is FIFA's response to this? And it's come an awful time for him for that claim.
I think this is the issue, Max, right? Is that it's narratives. Narratives keep building and building and building. So the fact that even today we're discussing this conflation of business versus football, do you think that people are just so eager to chastise Infantino, FIFA, and a lot of this related to Donald Trump and the US as well? Do you think that, if anything, they should have more of a focus on the games itself and the fact that we're seeing more games, more goals? This is the most goals that's happened in a tournament since, I think, 2002. Do you think inevitably these things are always going to be going on in the background of any major event, any major sporting event around the world, and that, if anything, the football should just be focused on?
I think this will always go on. But I still think it's not just focused on football. This will always be discussed. I think you probably go back to like Roman and Greek times to be able to talk about politics, and they still love their Olympics, but they still have their politics. And I think maybe it's not so dramatic, but it will always be on the newspapers and be followed by people. And I actually think it is important that it is consistently in the news and consistently focused upon, because they have to be held to a high standard. If they weren't, standards would slip, even if they tried their best, and probably will go into a murkier world than they want. To know that they're always being tracked and always being watched, even to the extent of disrupting some of the focus on football, I think is a really good thing for sport of this size. Every size sport at this kind of level, should have that focus from these. I think, but I think it will always happen regardless of who you have in place.
And I think there needs to be some level of understanding. I think did you see Thomas Tuchel was coming out and blaming the cameras and where they were situated so that he couldn't see his team, sing the national anthem before the game. And FIFA have said they've changed their rules immediately to try and...
It was ridiculous though.
It was outrageous. When I saw it from the back angle, it was stupid. It was stupid.
But I think FIFA, at a press conference recently, they said, I believe it was either an Iranian official or I believe the mother of the Cape Verde goalkeeper.
Yeah.
And he says, don't worry, we're trying to sort these things. I think in the background, there's so much that we don't see. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to these narratives, these echo chambers of this is bad, this is what's going on, sometimes there's a need for a new nuanced conversation about, okay, well, is it understandable? As you said earlier, Max, is that it is the US's prerogative whether they want to deny or accept someone coming into their country. Inevitably, it just so happens that this conflates with the biggest tournament in the world where over 1 billion people are going to be watching. I think that's where the main issue is. But a topic I think that we need to speak about with regards to Infantino, I think it's the difference between how he was in Russia and Qatar to now. And lots of people online are basically saying that that's down to his relationship with Donald Trump and watching Donald Trump closely and arguably mimicking some of the political gestures and things that he says. So if we all remember back to Qatar, where he famously said in a press conference, today I feel like a migrant worker, today I feel gay, today I feel one of you, every one of you, right? There was a press conference on the 10th of June in which he's challenged on the things that we're discussing right now. He said, well, what do you think about Omar Artan not being allowed into this country? What do you think about the fact that Iran have to train in Mexico? And he's saying, I can't control that. It's not on me who polices the borders in this country.
It's really he's saying,
but it's true.
Well, it is true to an extent, but FIFA do also require certain commitments from countries to allow people in. They did it in Russia, they did it in Qatar. Qatar had to somewhat change their migrant labor laws. Whether that actually changed on the ground or not is a conversation up for having. But they have to do these things for FIFA to be like, yeah, that's okay. You could have the World Cup here. But it seems like it's like when it comes to the US, and maybe that's because of Trump, it's, oh, okay, you know what, they can do it. We just distance ourselves and say, we're not in control of this because we support it.
But then again, behind the scenes, his argument is, we got Iran to this World Cup. Do you remember at the start, when Italy were knocked out and Trump said, oh no, it wasn't Trump that said it, but there were politicians who were basically saying, oh, well, maybe Italy could take Iran's place in the tournament, right?
Yeah.
I can understand Infantino saying we got them to this World Cup and we got as many people as we could to ensure they play. They're playing in Mexico, which is their base, but we're doing what we can. I believe they drew to New Zealand 2-2 in their opening game, right? So it all goes back to there are things that are going on in the background that we're not going to see. Mm-hmm. But I think a really key point that I want to reiterate, Russia and Qatar, a lot of the news is suppressed in those countries. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a lot of the good that those countries are doing normally doesn't make it. The fact that there were migrant labor reforms during that World Cup in Qatar was completely pushed down. Mm-hmm. So the US, all these media outlets, a lot of them, if we look at The Athletic, for example, they're owned by the New York Times or a holding company that owns both the New York Times. The access to media is so much easier. Everything is spoken about so much more. So if anything, all these criticisms are happening so much more often and often and often. These narratives are building. Do you think that plays a big part in the criticisms of this World Cup?
Well, that's what it is. And even this whole thing of Infantino and Trump is because it's allowed. Because it's all about this. That's how the US free media is, and there's a massive argument on that. So we can have another podcast.
Free media.
Yeah, exactly. But that's how they do it. I mean, and he's been allowed that platform. Maybe Putin or the Qataris didn't need to be with the president every single day standing up there. Not sure the Qataris really want that kind of level of press. Trump wants it. So just because Trump wants it, you got to try and dip and dive where you can. So I think Infantino it's probably because of how the US do things.
Yeah,
that's dragged him along as well. But I mean, I'm not absolving Infantino. I know I'm sounding very on his side. As I say, I think he should be held accountable. And there are some things that I think are wrong, but I think this is because of how open the US is. That is.
Well, you know that original point about the transport prices going up. It was in the original hosting agreement between the host cities and FIFA that transport be free.
What do you think FIFA can do about it? Do you think they go, hey, look, do you know what? Take the World Cup away from you now. So
but I know this is a completely different example, and we're talking about something completely different here. But the Under-20 World Cup, the FIFA were hosting in Indonesia, due to protests in Indonesia and I guess disruption over Israel's participation. Israel's participation in the Under-20 World Cup. A month before the World Cup was supposed to start, they took it away from Indonesia. And it goes kind of back to that point I was saying, is that FIFA then acted within their powers. They have the power. This is our brand. This is our thing that we're promoting to you. You can't do what we want you to do with it, so we're taking it away. And then we come here to the US, take, for instance, again, the Somali referee. They're still paying the referee for his participation, what he would have got paid in the World Cup. So they're paying him, but he's not there. And all
still
it does
a good
is...
gesture, though.
Oh, no, of course.
Like,
but it comes as essentially, it's a loss of money. You're paying someone for a thing they can't produce because they're not there to produce it. And I think then it comes back down to, again, they obviously can't tell a country, you need to do this, but they should tell them, you need to do this. Otherwise, we may look at moving stuff. Well, too late now, they've started.
But that's what, look, I mean, on that example, if Indonesia knew that Israel was going to be participating, we don't want to get into a political argument in that sense, but like, what FIFA or anyone's asking for is just make sure that all countries are safe.
Yeah.
Right. So it's so, and if they go, we don't know if Indonesia. I don't know anything about the politics of Indonesia. We don't know if the Indonesians. Maybe it's a political reason they didn't want to be able to keep the Israelis safe, or it might be a genuine reason. It could be genuine as the sense of the one that happened in the UK with the Aston Villa, Maccabi Tel Aviv, where the UK said that we couldn't, and that's even more frightening. That we're supposed to be a top country in the Western world, and we couldn't look after Israel, and there was going to be some boycotting of that event. We said, I get to. It shouldn't be that you could just drag it away. But if you are talking about safety of nationals, I think that is a concern. That probably is a legitimate reason. But if you're talking about train ticket prices, a little bit different. But could FIFA have stepped up and said, by the way, okay, we're going to put buses on or whatever it takes? I know it's hard travel-wise. That's what FIFA could have done a little bit more. But there might be, again, more stuff behind the... I know that we're getting close to the end of this, but
and again, what we're all forgetting is that they have a monopoly over World Cups. So if anything, when we're questioning, can FIFA do this, they're the only ones within the power, within the remit to do anything about it. So I think the fact that, as we've just said, they're paying Omar Artan still is a good gesture. They're doing what they can in that situation because a national is not allowed into a country. He had a contract. It wasn't his fault because he had a visa that was revoked. Okay, so they're paying. That is an instance of FIFA doing something which everyone would look at that and say, okay, we want him at the tournament. He should be refereeing. FIFA are not deciding to reject him. If that's the case, you should probably honour his contract, and they're doing that. But I think this is the issue optically, is we're not seeing enough of this from FIFA. I think, as I said, in the original hosting agreement, the cities were going to provide free transport. But unfortunately, because everything else was hiked up and costs imposed on them, they said, you know what, FIFA, please let us charge some money because this is how we're going to make it back.
So they need a new head of comms, is what you're saying. So you've got a new job coming.
They're not marketing himself very well. But...
So I think a really interesting point to kind of conclude on is that because Coca-Cola are the official partnership of this World Cup, any sponsors that these stadiums normally have, because Coca-Cola has subsidiaries, don't they, in coffee, they can't have any competing brands in these stadiums. So again, we're seeing a loss of revenue. Now, we've talked to death all about the finances of this World Cup and how it's all being imposed on fans. I want to reiterate again, is that FIFA is not for profit, right? 2.7 billion, I think it's 16% of their revenue is kept so they can put that on wages, salaries, administrative things. Everything else is pumped out into the confederations. The whole point, this is the first time I've ever seen Curacao play a football game. This is the first time I've ever seen Cape Verde play a football game. Optically, for these nations, this is good PR. This is good exposure.
Absolutely.
Cape Verde drew with Spain. It's an incredible. Now the goalkeeper, I think he has over millions of Instagram followers
he
now.
Millions overnight.
You know, if we're talking
there you
about,
go. That's the beautiful game then. That we brought these countries in.
But if we're talking about ways for individuals to make money, again, of course, footballers are always going to be paid a lot of money because the amount of broadcasting, sponsorship, money that goes into the game. But I think the issue, which I'll always come back to, is that this World Cup has been so conflated between the issues of business and passion of the sport. And what we're here to talk about, hopefully going into the future, is the fact that these two are so interlinked with each other.
Absolutely, they are.
We see this in a nutshell. We see it in a bubble, in that only one can exist at one time. But unfortunately, that's not the case. You know, throughout this podcast series, we're going to be talking about so many different issues that cross over into legal issues, financial stuff, accounting, so many things that happen off the pitch, which ultimately will always have an impact to what happens on it. But I think what always stands true is football, is the game. We're going to be watching these games. I'm off to Atlanta in a week. You've already been to America, Max. Yep. We're still, if God willing and we have the money, we'll go and watch these games, because that's the most beautiful thing about this.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's become so controversial, is that it's so spoken about. There are so many narratives. So I'm hoping that in future, this is somewhere you come, because we will simplify it for you. We're going to talk about plan A, plan B, what are both sides of the debate, and how can we kind of meet everyone in the middle? And I think that's the most important thing.
Well, the main thing is, and I'll say it again, as much as I love sport and I love football, number one is it's business, and two is it's sport. If it wasn't, then support your local team down the park. Otherwise, but this is what I love about this podcast, and what we're doing is we're going to go deep into business, politics, and everything around it. So yeah, great.
And let me just end. Jordan, where are England getting in this World Cup?
You called me a pessimist earlier.
Yeah.
And I like to call myself a realist. I want to say that the love of the game and the support of my country wants me to say that it's coming home. I don't think it is.
Okay.
I think, you know, I think the Spanish team, the French team, even with Spain's draw, I think the Spanish team, the French team, they're too strong. I think we make semi-finals.
Okay, Max?
Right, I did say I was a pessimist on this as well, but I'm going to go now. I definitely think it's going to be a France-England final. That's my view. And then it's all up for grabs, right? If you remember the game we had against France, was it 4 years ago? Kane hit it pen over.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Nearly missed one recently.
Yeah, better not do that again.
So maybe we get a penalty this time, and that's the decisive one in the final. Come on, let's go for it.
You know what? I think this is our year, to be honest. I really think this is our year. I think that we were incredible in that second half. Sorry, did I say second half? I mean in the third quarter of the game.
Yeah.
I thought we were very good.
Good commercial.
And in the final quarter as well, not so much. But no, I think this is a really exciting time. Hopefully I'm going to be reporting while I'm out there in America, talking to locals on the ground. How have they been hit by the pricing? What do they think about the World Cup? Is the infrastructure there? And I'm really looking forward to it. So it's been great to have you both on the podcast today.
Thank you
talking
very
about
much.
this.
Yeah, good discussion.
And go like, subscribe, follow all our pages. You can find that in our bio. And yeah, peace and love.